Sarah Martinez had been locked up in Riverside Women's Correctional Facility for 3 years. The guards thought they knew everything about her. She was quiet, kept to herself, and never caused trouble. Her crime seemed simple enough. She had been caught with stolen jewelry worth $50,000. The police said she was part of a burglary ring, but Sarah never talked about it. Most prisoners made noise, fought with guards, or tried to escape. Sarah was different. She spent her days reading books from the prison library and writing letters that she never sent. The other inmates called her Ghost because she moved so quietly through the halls. Even the toughest women in the prison left her alone. There was something about Sarah that made people uncomfortable, though nobody could explain what it was. Detective Maria Santos had arrested Sarah 3 years ago. Maria remembered the case well because Sarah had been so calm during her arrest. Most criminals either fought back or begged for mercy. Sarah had simply put her hands behind her back and waited for the handcuffs. She never asked for a lawyer, and never tried to make excuses. When the judge sentenced her to 5 years in prison, Sarah just nodded like she expected it. The stolen jewelry case had always bothered Detective Santos. The burglary happened at the home of wealthy businessman Robert Chen. Someone had broken into his mansion while he was away on business. They took expensive watches, diamond rings, and rare coins. The burglar knew exactly where to find the most valuable items, almost like they had been inside the house before. Sarah was caught trying to sell one of the stolen rings at a pawn shop downtown. The security cameras showed her clearly, and her fingerprints were on the jewelry box. It seemed like an open and shut case. But Detective Santos noticed something strange. Sarah had only taken a small portion of the stolen items with her. The rest of the jewelry was never found. When Santos asked Sarah about the missing items, she just stared silently. Inside the prison, Sarah followed the same routine every day. She woke up at 6 in the morning, made her bed perfectly, and went to breakfast. She always sat alone at the same table in the corner of the cafeteria. After breakfast, she worked in the prison laundry, washing and folding clothes without speaking to anyone. In the afternoon, she went to the library and read books about history and science. The prison librarian, Mrs. Johnson, was one of the few people Sarah talked to. Their conversations were always brief and polite. Sarah would ask for specific books, thank Mrs. Johnson, and return them exactly on time. Mrs. Johnson noticed that Sarah read unusual books: military strategy, chemistry textbooks, and biographies of famous criminals. When Mrs. Johnson asked why she was interested in these topics, Sarah said she liked learning new things. Sarah's cell was neat and organized. She had very few personal belongings, just some books, writing paper, and a small mirror. Her cellmate, Carmen Rodriguez, had been moved to a different cell after only 2 weeks. Carmen told the other prisoners that Sarah gave her nightmares. She said Sarah would lie awake all night, staring at the ceiling with her eyes wide open. Carmen swore that sometimes she could hear Sarah whispering to herself in the dark. The prison guards found Sarah easy to manage. She never broke rules, never got into fights, and never complained about anything. Guard Captain Thompson appreciated having at least one prisoner who didn't cause problems. He often used Sarah as an example when training new guards. He would point her out and say that this was how all prisoners should behave. But some guards felt uneasy around Sarah. Officer Martinez noticed that Sarah seemed to be watching everything and everyone. She would sit quietly in the common room, but her eyes were always moving, taking in every detail. Officer Martinez felt like Sarah was studying the prison, learning its secrets. When she mentioned this to Captain Thompson, he laughed and said she was being paranoid. The prison had security cameras everywhere, and Sarah knew where each one was located. She had memorized the guards' schedules and knew which doors were locked at what times. Other prisoners thought she was planning an escape, but Sarah never showed any interest in breaking out. She seemed content to serve her time quietly. Sarah received mail regularly, but it was always business letters from lawyers and government offices. She never got personal letters from family or friends. When social workers asked about her family, Sarah said she didn't have any relatives. Her background check had turned up very little information. She had no employment history before her arrest, no social media accounts, and no friends who came forward to speak for her during the trial. The mystery of Sarah's past made some people curious. A few inmates tried to get her to talk about her life before prison. They asked about her childhood, her family, and how she learned to steal jewelry. Sarah would listen to their questions politely, then change the subject or walk away. She was skilled at avoiding conversations she didn't want to have. One day, Sarah received a visitor. The prison log showed that a man named David Kim had come to see her. The guards who were present during the visit said it was strange. David and Sarah sat across from each other for 30 minutes without saying a word. They just looked at each other, like they were having a conversation with their eyes. When the visit ended, David left without scheduling another appointment. Detective Santos ran a background check on David Kim but found nothing suspicious. He was a businessman who traveled frequently for work. He had no criminal record and no obvious connection to Sarah. When Santos tried to interview him, David claimed he had visited the wrong person by mistake. He said he was looking for someone else with a similar name. The prison routine continued the same way for months. Sarah woke up, worked, read, and went to sleep. She marked days off on a calendar she kept hidden under her mattress. The calendar had strange symbols written on certain dates, but nobody could figure out what they meant. Sarah was counting down to something, but she kept her plans to herself. As Sarah's 4th year in prison began, she started acting slightly different. She spent more time exercising in her cell, doing push-ups and sit-ups late at night. She began asking the librarian for books about locksmithing and electrical systems. Mrs. Johnson thought Sarah might be planning to learn a trade for when she got out of prison. The truth was much more complicated than anyone realized. Sarah Martinez was not just a simple burglar serving time for stealing jewelry. She was someone with skills and connections that went far beyond what the police had discovered. Her quiet behavior in prison was not submission. It was preparation. Sarah was getting ready for something big, and nobody saw it coming. The morning of March 15th started like any other day at Riverside Women's Correctional Facility. Guard Officer Kim Wilson walked down the cell block for the 6 o'clock head count. She checked each cell, making sure every prisoner was present and accounted for. When she reached cell block C-07, she stopped at Sarah Martinez's cell and looked inside. The bed was made perfectly, just like always. Sarah's books were stacked neatly on the small shelf. Her writing paper was organized in a pile on the desk. Everything looked normal except for one important detail. Sarah was gone. Officer Wilson called out Sarah's name, thinking maybe she was in the bathroom area of the cell. There was no answer. Wilson immediately radioed for backup and called Captain Thompson. Within minutes, the entire cell block was locked down. Guards searched every corner of Sarah's cell, looking for clues about how she had disappeared. The cell door was still locked from the outside. The window was too small for a person to crawl through, and it had metal bars that were still secure. Captain Thompson was confused and angry. He had worked at the prison for 15 years and had never lost a prisoner like this. The security system showed that no alarms had been triggered during the night. The cameras in the hallway recorded nothing unusual. Sarah had simply vanished without leaving any trace of how she got out. The prison went into immediate lockdown. Every prisoner was confined to their cells while guards searched the entire facility. They checked the laundry room where Sarah worked, the library where she spent her afternoons, and every possible hiding place in the building. The search teams even looked in the kitchen freezers and storage rooms. Sarah was nowhere to be found. Detective Santos got the call about Sarah's escape at 7:30 that morning. She was having breakfast with her family when her phone rang. Captain Thompson's voice was tense as he explained that their quiet prisoner had disappeared overnight. Santos dropped her coffee and rushed to the prison immediately. When Santos arrived, at Riverside, she went straight to Sarah's cell. She examined every inch of the small space, looking for clues that the guards might have missed. The cell walls were solid concrete with no hidden passages or loose panels. The ceiling was intact with no signs that Sarah had crawled into the ventilation system. The floor was solid with no tunnel entrances. The mystery deepened when Santos looked at Sarah's personal belongings. All of her books were still there, including the chemistry and military strategy texts that had seemed unusual. Her writing paper was still stacked on the desk, but Santos noticed that some sheets were missing. Sarah had been writing something, but whatever it was had disappeared with her. Mrs. Johnson, the prison librarian, was interviewed about Sarah's recent behavior. She told Detective Santos that Sarah had been asking for different types of books in the weeks before her disappearance. Instead of history and science books, Sarah had requested materials about geography and weather patterns. She had also asked for maps of the local area. The prison's security footage was reviewed frame by frame. The cameras showed Sarah returning to her cell after dinner at 6:15 the previous evening. She was seen reading in her cell until lights out at 10 o'clock. After that, the infrared cameras showed a figure lying in the bed until 6 in the morning. But when Officer Wilson looked in the cell, Sarah was gone. Something bothered Detective Santos about the security footage. The figure in Sarah's bed never moved during the 8 hours between lights out and morning head count. Most people shift and turn in their sleep, but the figure remained perfectly still all night. Santos suspected that Sarah had created a dummy to fool the cameras while she made her escape. The prison authorities contacted the FBI since Sarah's disappearance was now a federal case. Agent Robert Chen was assigned to lead the investigation. Strangely, Agent Chen had the same last name as Robert Chen, the businessman whose house Sarah had burglarized 3 years earlier. This coincidence would later prove to be more important than anyone realized. Agent Chen reviewed Sarah's criminal file and noticed several odd details that the local police had overlooked. Sarah's fingerprints were in the FBI database, but only from her arrest 3 years ago. There was no record of her prints from any previous crimes or background checks. It was unusual for someone her age to have no fingerprint history before committing a major burglary. The investigation expanded beyond the prison walls. Police officers searched the area around Riverside for any signs of Sarah's escape route. They used tracking dogs to follow any scent trails, but the dogs could not pick up Sarah's smell outside the prison building. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Local hospitals and clinics were contacted in case Sarah was injured during her escape. Bus stations and airports were monitored for any sightings of a woman matching her description. Police set up roadblocks on highways, leading away from the prison. Despite all these efforts, there was no trace of Sarah anywhere. The media picked up the story of the mysterious prison escape. Newspapers called Sarah the ghost prisoner because of her quiet behavior and impossible disappearance. Television. News shows interviewed prison experts who said that escaping from a maximum security facility like Riverside should have been impossible without inside help. Some people suspected that Sarah had help from prison employees. All guards and staff members were questioned about their relationships with Sarah. Their financial records were examined for any suspicious payments that might indicate bribery. Polygraph tests were administered to anyone who had regular contact with Sarah. All the tests came back clean. The investigation revealed something interesting about Sarah's visitor, David Kim. When FBI agents tracked him down, they discovered that David Kim was not his real name. The identification he had used to visit Sarah was fake, created by someone with professional skills. The real David Kim was a businessman in Seattle who had never heard of Sarah Martinez. Agent Chen realized that Sarah's disappearance was more complex than a simple prison break. Someone had been planning this escape for a long time, creating false identities and carefully studying the prison's security systems. Sarah had not acted alone, and her quiet behavior during 3 years in prison had been part of a larger plan. The search for Sarah continued for weeks without success. Police checked every lead and followed up on every tip from the public. Some people claimed to have seen Sarah at shopping malls or restaurants, but these sightings always turned out to be false. Sarah had disappeared so completely that investigators began to wonder if she was still alive. Then, exactly 1 month after Sarah's escape, the first body was discovered. A jogger found the remains of a man in Lincoln Park, about 20 miles from the prison. The victim had been killed with professional precision, a single gunshot to the back of the head. The police had no idea who the victim was or why he had been murdered. Detective Santos was called to examine the crime scene. When she saw the body, she felt a chill run down her spine. Something about the murder reminded her of Sarah Martinez, though she could not explain why. The killer had been careful and methodical, just like Sarah had been during her time in prison. The investigation was about to become much more complicated than anyone expected. The dead man in Lincoln Park was identified as Marcus Webb, a 42-year-old accountant from downtown. Marcus lived alone in a small apartment and worked for a mid-sized accounting firm. He had no criminal record and seemed to live a quiet, ordinary life. The police could not understand why anyone would want to kill him. Detective Santos examined Marcus Webb's body carefully. The killer had shot him once in the back of the head with a small-caliber pistol. It was a professional execution, clean and efficient. The bullet had been removed from the victim's skull, making it impossible to trace the weapon. There were no signs of a struggle, which meant Marcus had either known his killer or been taken by surprise. The crime scene told an interesting story. Marcus had been killed somewhere else and then moved to Lincoln Park. His clothes were clean, and his shoes had no dirt or grass stains, even though his body was found lying on the ground. The killer had been careful to leave no fingerprints or DNA evidence at the scene. Agent Chen joined Detective Santos at the crime scene. He was struck by how methodical the murder appeared. The killer had planned every detail and executed the crime without making any mistakes. This level of precision reminded him of trained assassins or military operatives. It was not the work of an ordinary criminal. The investigation into Marcus Webb's background revealed some surprising connections. 3 years earlier, Marcus had been the accountant for Robert Chen, the businessman whose house Sarah Martinez had burglarized. Marcus had managed Robert Chen's financial records and knew details about his wealth and business dealings. Detective Santos realized this could not be a coincidence. Sarah had burglarized Robert Chen's house, and now Robert Chen's former accountant was dead. There had to be a connection between these events, but Santos could not figure out what it was. She decided to contact Robert Chen directly to ask about his relationship with Marcus Webb. Robert Chen was traveling in Asia when Detective Santos called him. He seemed genuinely shocked to learn about Marcus Webb's murder. Robert explained that Marcus had worked for him for 2 years, managing his investment accounts and tax records. Marcus had been a good employee who never caused any problems. When Santos asked about the burglary at his house 3 years earlier, Robert Chen's tone changed. He became nervous and started speaking quickly. He said the burglary had been very traumatic for him, and he preferred not to discuss it. Santos noticed that Robert Chen seemed more upset about talking about the burglary than hearing about Marcus Webb's death. The FBI began investigating Marcus Webb's recent activities. His phone records showed that he had received several calls from unknown numbers in the weeks before his death. His bank account had a large deposit of $25,000 that could not be explained. Marcus had told his co-workers that he was expecting to come into some money, but he never explained how. Agent Chen suspected that Marcus Webb had been blackmailing someone. The unexplained money deposit suggested that Marcus had been paid to keep quiet about something. But what secret could an accountant know that would be worth $25,000? And why would someone kill him after paying him to stay silent? The search for Sarah Martinez continued while the police investigated Marcus Webb's murder. There were no credible sightings of Sarah anywhere in the state. She had disappeared so completely that some investigators wondered if she might also be dead. Perhaps someone had killed both Sarah and Marcus to cover up a larger crime. Then, 2 weeks after Marcus Webb's body was found, a second victim was discovered. This time it was a woman named Lisa Park, a 38-year-old real estate agent. Lisa's body was found in her car in an abandoned parking garage downtown. Like Marcus Webb, she had been shot once in the back of the head with a small caliber. Pistol Detective Santos was called to examine Lisa Park's crime scene. The similarities to Marcus Webb's murder were obvious. The same type of weapon had been used, and the killer had been just as careful about not leaving evidence. Lisa's purse and jewelry were still with her, so robbery was not the motive. The investigation into Lisa Park's background revealed another connection to Robert Chen. Lisa had been the real estate agent who sold Robert Chen his mansion 3 years earlier. She had also helped him purchase several other properties in the area. Lisa knew details about Robert Chen's real estate investments and his personal finances. Agent Chen was now certain that these murders were connected to Robert Chen and the burglary of his house 3 years earlier. Someone was killing people who knew Robert Chen's business secrets. The killer was working through a list, eliminating witnesses or accomplices one by one. The FBI placed Robert Chen under protective custody when he returned from his trip to Asia. Robert was frightened and confused about why people connected to him were being murdered. He insisted that he had no enemies and could not think of anyone who would want to hurt him or his associates. Detective Santos interviewed Robert Chen for several hours, trying to understand what secret was worth killing for. Robert claimed that his business dealings were all legitimate and legal. He said he had made his money through smart investments in technology companies and real estate. He could not explain why someone would target people who knew about his finances. But Agent Chen noticed that Robert Chen seemed to be hiding something. Robert would not make eye contact when discussing certain aspects of his business. His answers became vague when asked about specific transactions or investments. Chen suspected that Robert was not telling the complete truth about his wealth. The investigation took an unexpected turn when forensic accountants examined Marcus Webb's files. Hidden in his computer records were detailed financial documents, showing that Robert Chen had been involved in money laundering for international criminal organizations. Robert had been using his legitimate businesses to clean dirty money from drug trafficking and arms dealing. Marcus Webb had discovered Robert Chen's illegal activities while managing his accounts. Instead of reporting the crimes to authorities, Marcus had decided to blackmail Robert. The $25,000 deposit in Marcus's bank account was the first payment from Robert Chen to keep him quiet. Lisa Park had also become suspicious of Robert Chen's finances. As his real estate agent, she had noticed that he paid for expensive properties with cash from unknown sources. Lisa had started asking questions about where Robert's money came from. She had become a threat that needed to be eliminated. Detective Santos realized that Sarah Martinez's burglary of Robert Chen's house had not been a simple theft. Sarah had been looking for evidence of Robert's illegal activities. The jewelry she stole was just a cover story to hide her real purpose. Sarah was working for someone who wanted to expose or stop Robert Chen's money laundering operation. The FBI began investigating Robert Chen's business partners and associates. They discovered a network of shell companies and offshore bank accounts used to move illegal money. Robert Chen was just one part of a much larger criminal organization that operated internationally. Agent Chen suspected that Sarah Martinez was not really a common burglar at all. She was likely a trained operative working for law enforcement or a rival criminal organization. Her 3 years in prison had been part of a long-term undercover operation. Her escape and the subsequent murders were all part of a plan to take down Robert Chen's criminal network. The investigation was becoming more dangerous as the FBI got closer to the truth. Someone was willing to kill anyone who knew too much about Robert Chen's illegal activities. Detective Santos and Agent Chen realized they might be the next targets if they continued digging into the case. The search for Sarah Martinez took on new urgency. She was not just an escaped prisoner anymore, she was a key witness in a major international crime investigation. Finding Sarah might be the only way to stop the murders and bring down the entire criminal organization. But Sarah remained hidden, and the body count continued to rise. 3 weeks after Lisa Park's murder, a third body was discovered. This time it was Dr. William Foster, a forensic accountant who had been reviewing Robert Chen's business records for the FBI investigation. Dr. Foster was found dead in his home office, killed by the same method as the previous victims, a single gunshot to the back of the head. Detective Santos arrived at Dr. Foster's house and immediately noticed the killer's signature precision. There were no signs of forced entry, which meant Dr. Foster had let his killer into the house willingly. His computer had been wiped clean, and all his files related to Robert Chen's case were missing. The killer had taken the time to destroy evidence before leaving. Agent Chen was deeply troubled by Dr. Foster's murder. The killer was now targeting law enforcement personnel working on the case. This meant someone was monitoring the FBI investigation closely and knew which people posed a threat to the criminal organization. Agent Chen realized that there might be a leak inside law enforcement. The FBI began conducting internal security checks on everyone involved in the Robert Chen investigation. Phone records were examined, computer access logs were reviewed, and polygraph tests were administered. The investigation had become as much about finding the mole inside the FBI as it was about catching the killer. Meanwhile, Detective Santos received an unexpected phone call at her home. The caller's voice was electronically disguised, making it impossible to identify whether it was a man or woman. The caller said, "Stop looking for Sarah Martinez. She is not who you think she is. If you want to stay alive, focus on Robert Chen." Santos immediately contacted Agent Chen about the threatening phone call. They arranged to meet at a secure location away from FBI headquarters. Both investigators were now worried that their own colleagues might be working for the criminal organization they were trying to stop. The pattern of murders was becoming clearer. Each victim had known something about Robert Chen's illegal activities. Marcus Webb had discovered the money laundering operation. Lisa Park had questioned the source of Robert's wealth. Dr. Foster had been analyzing the financial evidence for the FBI. Someone was systematically eliminating anyone who could testify against Robert Chen. Agent Chen decided to interview Robert Chen again, this time in a more aggressive manner. Robert was being held in protective custody at a safe house outside the city. When Agent Chen confronted him with evidence of the money laundering operation, Robert finally broke down and admitted the truth. Robert Chen had been forced into money laundering by a criminal organization run by Viktor Petrov, a Russian businessman with connections to organized crime. 3 years earlier, Viktor had threatened to kill Robert's family unless he used his legitimate businesses to clean dirty money. Robert had been trapped in the scheme ever since. The burglary at Robert's house had been ordered by Viktor Petrov. Viktor suspected that Robert was skimming money from the laundering operation and wanted to search his house for hidden financial records. Sarah Martinez had not been a common burglar. She was one of Viktor's operatives sent to gather evidence against Robert. Agent Chen realized that the FBI had been looking at the case backwards. Sarah Martinez was not trying to expose Robert Chen's crimes. She was working for the criminal organization that was committing them. Her 3 years in prison had been a cover story to hide her real identity as a trained assassin working for Viktor Petrov. Detective Santos was shocked by this revelation. Sarah had fooled everyone at the prison into thinking she was just a quiet burglar serving her time. In reality, she had been using those 3 years to plan her escape and prepare for a mission to eliminate witnesses against the criminal organization. The FBI began investigating Viktor Petrov and his connections to Sarah Martinez. Viktor owned businesses in several countries and had been suspected of various crimes, but never prosecuted. He employed people with military and intelligence backgrounds to carry out operations around the world. Sarah Martinez fit the profile of one of his operatives. Agent Chen discovered that Sarah Martinez was not her real name. Her fingerprints did not match any records in international databases, which meant she had undergone surgery to change them. Her background before the burglary arrest was completely fabricated. Sarah was a professional killer who had assumed a false identity for her mission. The investigation revealed that Viktor Petrov's organization had been planning to eliminate Robert Chen and all witnesses to the money laundering operation. The plan was to kill everyone who knew about the crimes and then disappear with the laundered money. Sarah's prison sentence had provided perfect cover for the operation. Detective Santos understood why Sarah had been so quiet and observant during her time in prison. She had been studying the facility and planning her escape while waiting for orders from Viktor Petrov. Her mysterious visitor, the man claiming to be David Kim, had been delivering instructions and updates about the mission. The FBI realized they were dealing with a highly organized international criminal network. Viktor Petrov had resources and connections that allowed him to place operatives in American prisons and monitor FBI investigations. The scope of the case was much larger than anyone had initially understood. Agent Chen decided to set a trap for Sarah Martinez. The FBI would leak false information about a new witness in the Robert Chen case. If Sarah was monitoring their investigation, she would try to eliminate this fictitious witness. The FBI would be waiting for her when she made her move. Detective Santos was assigned to play the role of the fake witness. She would be moved to a secure location where the FBI could control the environment and watch for Sarah's approach. It was a dangerous assignment, but Santos volunteered because she wanted to catch the woman who had fooled everyone for so long. The FBI set up surveillance around the safe house where Detective Santos was staying. Hidden cameras were installed, and undercover agents were positioned throughout the area. If Sarah Martinez appeared, They would be ready to capture her alive and get information about Viktor Petrov's organization. 2 days into the operation, the surveillance team noticed unusual activity in the area. A woman matching Sarah's description had been seen near the safe house, apparently conducting reconnaissance. The woman was skilled at avoiding the cameras and staying out of sight, but trained FBI observers managed to spot her. Agent Chen authorized his team to move in and arrest the suspect. But when they reached the location where Sarah had been spotted, she was gone. The FBI agents found only a small piece of paper with a handwritten message: "You cannot catch what you do not understand." Detective Santos realized that Sarah Martinez was playing games with them. She knew about the FBI trap and was demonstrating that she could get close to her targets anytime she wanted. Sarah was not just a killer, she was a psychological warfare expert who enjoyed taunting her enemies. The next morning, the FBI surveillance team found another body. This time it was Agent Rodriguez, one of the undercover agents watching the safe house. He had been killed during the night while on patrol. The killer had managed to eliminate an FBI agent without alerting any of the other surveillance personnel. Agent Chen knew they were outmatched. Sarah Martinez was a professional with skills beyond what local law enforcement could handle. He requested assistance from the CIA and military special operations units. The hunt for Sarah Martinez was about to become a national security operation. Detective Santos was moved to a new location under heavy security. She was no longer bait in a trap. She was a potential victim who needed protection. The investigation had become a deadly game of cat and mouse, and Sarah Martinez was always one step ahead. The death of FBI agent Rodriguez changed everything about the investigation. What had started as a simple prison escape was now a federal case involving international terrorism and organized crime. The FBI brought in their best behavioral analysts and counterintelligence specialists to profile Sarah Martinez and predict her next move. Dr. Amanda Cross, a criminal psychologist with 20 years of experience, was assigned to create a psychological profile of Sarah. After reviewing all the evidence, Dr. Cross concluded that Sarah was not just a killer, she was a master manipulator who enjoyed the psychological aspects of her work as much as the physical violence. According to Dr. Cross, Sarah had spent 3 years in prison studying not just the facility's security systems but also the personalities and behaviors of everyone around her. She had learned how to read people and exploit their weaknesses. This made her extremely dangerous because she could blend into any environment and gain people's trust. Agent Chen received support from the CIA's Special Activities Division, which specialized in tracking down international criminals and terrorist operatives. The CIA agents brought advanced surveillance technology and access to international intelligence networks that could help locate Viktor Petrov and his organization. The joint FBI-CIA task force discovered that Viktor Petrov had been planning the entire operation for over 5 years. The money laundering scheme through Robert Chen was just one part of a larger plan to infiltrate American financial institutions and steal hundreds of millions of dollars. Sarah Martinez was Viktor's most valuable operative in the United States. Detective Santos was moved to a classified military facility where she could be protected while continuing to work on the case. The facility was designed to be impenetrable, with multiple layers of security and trained soldiers guarding every entrance. Even with these precautions, Santos felt like Sarah could somehow find a way to reach her. The investigation revealed that Sarah Martinez had multiple false identities prepared for her escape from prison. She had access to safe houses, weapons, and financial resources hidden throughout the region. Viktor Petrov's organization had spent years preparing for this operation, and they had contingency plans for every possible situation. Intelligence analysts discovered that Sarah had been communicating with Viktor Petrov through encrypted messages hidden in online gaming platforms. The communications were so sophisticated that it took the CIA's best cryptographers several days to decode them. The messages revealed that Sarah was preparing for a major operation that would eliminate all remaining witnesses and allow Viktor's organization to disappear with their stolen money. Agent Chen realized that Robert Chen was still in danger, despite being in protective custody. Viktor Petrov wanted Robert dead to tie up loose ends, and Sarah Martinez was skilled enough to reach him even in a secure facility. The FBI decided to move Robert to the same military base where Detective Santos was being protected. The military base was called Fort Harrison, and it was designed to hold high-value prisoners and witnesses. The facility had never been breached by external forces, and the commanding officer, Colonel James Mitchell, was confident that Sarah Martinez could not penetrate their security. Colonel Mitchell had dealt with international terrorists before and believed his soldiers could handle one escaped prisoner. Dr. Cross warned Colonel Mitchell that he was underestimating Sarah Martinez. According to her psychological profile, Sarah was patient, intelligent, and willing to take extraordinary risks to complete her missions. Dr. Cross believed that Sarah would find a way to infiltrate the base, no matter how secure it appeared to be. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after Robert Chen arrived at Fort Harrison. One of the perimeter guards, Sergeant David Kim, failed to report in during his scheduled check-in. When a patrol went to investigate, they found Sergeant Kim unconscious, but alive. He had been drugged with a substance that erased his short-term memory. Colonel Mitchell ordered an immediate lockdown of the entire base. Every soldier was accounted for, every vehicle was searched, and every building was inspected. The search revealed that someone had been inside the base, but there was no trace of how they had entered or where they had gone. Agent Chen suspected that Sarah Martinez was already inside Fort Harrison. She had somehow replaced or impersonated Sergeant Kim and used his access to study the base's security systems. Sarah was now familiar with the layout of the facility and the routines of the soldiers guarding it. Detective Santos felt a growing sense of dread as she realized how close Sarah might be. The woman who had fooled everyone at the prison for 3 years was now somewhere inside what was supposed to be the most secure facility in the region. Santos began to understand why Sarah's former cellmate had been so frightened of her. The base's security cameras were reviewed frame by frame, but there was no sign of any intruders. Sarah had moved through Fort Harrison without being detected by any of the surveillance systems. This level of skill suggested military or intelligence training, far beyond what a typical criminal would possess. Colonel Mitchell brought in additional security personnel from special operations units. The base was now guarded by some of the most highly trained soldiers in the military. Motion sensors were installed throughout the facility, and patrols were increased to cover every possible entry point. Mitchell was determined to catch Sarah Martinez if she tried to make another move. But Sarah was not planning a direct assault on the facility. Intelligence intercepts revealed that she was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Viktor Petrov's organization had been monitoring the investigation and knew that the FBI was preparing to move Robert Chen to a federal courthouse for testimony against the criminal network. The plan was to transport Robert Chen from Fort Harrison to the courthouse under heavy security. FBI agents and military personnel would escort him in an armored convoy with air support overhead. It seemed like an impenetrable security arrangement, but Agent Chen was worried that Sarah Martinez would find a way to exploit some weakness in the plan. Dr. Cross studied the transportation route and identified several potential ambush points where Sarah could attack the convoy. The FBI adjusted their plans to avoid these locations, but Dr. Cross warned that Sarah was smart enough to adapt to changes in their security arrangements. 2 days before the scheduled transport, another soldier at Fort Harrison was found unconscious. This time it was Corporal Maria Santos, a communication specialist who had access to radio frequencies and security codes. Like Sergeant Kim, Corporal Santos had been drugged and could not remember what had happened to her. Colonel Mitchell realized that Sarah Martinez was systematically compromising his security personnel. She was not trying to break into the base. The failed convoy operation left Detective Santos as the sole surviving witness in the case against Viktor Petrov's criminal organization. Agent Chen made the difficult decision to move her to a civilian location where Sarah Martinez might not expect to find her. They chose a small motel on the outskirts of town, reasoning that Sarah would expect them to use another secure government facility. Santos checked into the Sunset Motel under a false name, accompanied by 2 FBI agents posing as her family members. The motel was run down and unremarkable, exactly the kind of place that would not attract attention. Agent Chen hoped that this low-profile approach would buy them enough time to develop a new strategy for catching Sarah Martinez. But Sarah was already 3 steps ahead of the investigation. She had been monitoring FBI communications and knew about the motel before Detective Santos even arrived. Sarah had spent the past 24 hours studying the location and preparing for her final confrontation with the woman who had been hunting her for months. Dr. Cross warned Agent Chen that Sarah Martinez would not simply kill Detective Santos quickly and disappear. According to her psychological profile, Sarah enjoyed the mental aspects of her work and would want to have a conversation with Santos before eliminating her. This personality trait might provide an opportunity to capture Sarah alive. Agent Chen decided to use Detective Santos as bait one more time, but this operation would be different. Instead of trying to hide Santos from Sarah, they would make it easy for Sarah to find her. The FBI would then surround the location and capture Sarah when she made her move. It was a dangerous plan, but they were running out of options. Detective Santos was not happy about being used as bait again, but she understood that it might be their only chance to end the killing spree. She agreed to the plan on the condition that she would be allowed to carry a concealed weapon and have a direct radio link to the FBI backup teams. Santos was determined to survive her encounter with Sarah Martinez. The trap was set at an abandoned warehouse on the industrial side of town. Detective Santos would be alone inside the building, apparently unprotected and vulnerable. FBI snipers would be positioned on nearby rooftops, and assault teams would be hidden in the surrounding buildings. When Sarah appeared, they would have her surrounded. Agent Chen knew that Sarah would be suspicious of such an obvious setup, but he was counting on her arrogance and desire to personally confront Detective Santos. Dr. Cross believed that Sarah's psychological profile made her unable to resist the opportunity to have a face-to-face conversation with her primary target. Detective Santos entered the warehouse at sunset, carrying only a small pistol and a radio transmitter. The building was dark and filled with old machinery that created shadows and hiding places. Santos felt exposed and vulnerable, knowing that Sarah Martinez could be watching her from anywhere in the building. For 2 hours, nothing happened. Santos waited in the center of the warehouse, listening for any sounds that might indicate Sarah's presence. The FBI backup teams reported no movement around the building. Agent Chen began to worry that Sarah had detected the trap and decided not to take the bait. Then Detective Santos heard a slow clapping sound echoing through the warehouse. She turned toward the sound and saw a figure emerging from the shadows near the back of the building. It was Sarah Martinez, but she looked different than she had in prison. Sarah's hair was shorter and dyed black, and she was wearing dark clothing that made her blend into the shadows. Sarah walked slowly toward Detective Santos, keeping her hands visible to show that she was not immediately threatening. She stopped about 20 feet away and smiled in a way that made Santos feel cold inside. This was the woman who had fooled everyone at the prison and killed multiple people without leaving any evidence. "Hello, Detective Santos," Sarah said in a calm, pleasant voice. "I have been looking forward to meeting you properly. You have been very persistent in your investigation, and I respect that quality in an opponent." Santos kept her hand near her concealed weapon while activating her radio transmitter with the other hand. She needed to keep Sarah talking long enough for the FBI teams to get into position. "You killed a lot of innocent people, Sarah." Marcus, Webb, and Lisa Park never hurt anyone. Sarah laughed softly and shook her head. "Innocent? Detective Santos, you still don't understand what this case is really about. Marcus Webb was stealing money from his clients. Lisa Park was helping Robert Chin hide assets from tax authorities. Dr. Foster was selling confidential FBI information to the highest bidder. None of them were innocent." Detective Santos was shocked by these revelations. The investigation had portrayed the victims as innocent people caught up in Viktor Petrov's criminal activities, but Sarah was claiming that each victim had been involved in illegal activities of their own. Santos did not know whether to believe her. "Even if that's true, you had no right to kill them," Santos said, trying to keep Sarah engaged in conversation. "There are legal ways to deal with criminals. You're not a judge or jury." Sarah tilted her head and studied Santos with curious eyes. "Legal ways?" "Like the legal system that allowed Viktor Petrov to operate for years without being caught." Like the legal system that would have given Robert Chen a light sentence for money laundering, while the real criminals escaped justice. Sometimes the legal system needs help, Detective Santos. Agent Chen was listening to the conversation through Santos's radio transmitter. He signaled his teams to begin moving into position around the warehouse. They needed to get close enough to capture Sarah without alerting her to their presence. Sarah continued talking, seemingly unaware of the FBI teams closing in around the building. I want you to know that I respect your dedication to this case. You never gave up, even when everyone else thought I was just an escaped prisoner. You understood that there was more to the story. Santos realized that Sarah was playing psychological games, trying to make her feel sympathy for a cold-blooded killer. What happened to Robert Chen? Is he still alive? Sarah's expression became more serious. Robert Chen served his purpose. He provided us with access to American financial institutions and helped us identify other criminals in his network. But Robert became greedy and started stealing from his partners. That kind of betrayal cannot be tolerated in our business. The implication was clear. Sarah had killed Robert Chen along with all the other victims. Santos felt sick thinking about how many people had died because of this criminal organization. She needed to end this conversation and signal for the FBI teams to move in, but Sarah was not finished talking. I have one more thing to tell you, Detective Santos. The FBI investigation has been compromised from the beginning. Someone in your organization has been feeding information to Viktor Petrov. That's how we stayed ahead of you for so long. Santos was stunned by this revelation. If there was a mole inside the FBI, it meant that their current operation might also be compromised. Sarah might already know about the backup team surrounding the warehouse. As if reading Santos's thoughts, Sarah smiled and pulled out a small device that looked like a remote control. I know about your friends outside, Detective. I have been monitoring FBI communications all evening. Did you really think you could surprise me with such an obvious trap? Sarah pressed a button on the device, and suddenly the warehouse was filled with smoke and loud noises. She had planted flashbang grenades throughout the building and was using them to create chaos and confusion. Santos could not see anything through the smoke and could barely hear over the ringing in her ears. When the smoke finally cleared, Sarah Martinez was gone once again. Detective Santos was alone in the warehouse, surrounded by FBI agents who had failed to capture their target for the third time. Sarah had escaped, but this time she had left behind a message written on the warehouse wall. This is not over. Agent Chen realized that they had been outmatched from the beginning. Sarah Martinez and Viktor Petrov's organization were more sophisticated and better connected than anyone in law enforcement had imagined. The case would require a completely different approach if they ever hoped to bring these criminals to justice. Detective Santos looked at the message on the wall and knew that her life would never be safe as long as Sarah Martinez was free. Somewhere, out there, the woman who had fooled everyone was planning her next move. The hunt would continue, but now Santos understood that she was not just the hunter, she was also the prey.